Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be wrapping up our deep dive into how the Jaguars could address their roster during the 2023 offseason. First, we're going to recap our in-house moves, then we're going to project some free agents to this roster, and finally, we'll finish up this mini-series with a mock draft to assemble the final roster heading into training camp. So, we'll start out by talking about some of the stuff we've done previously, and I recommend if you haven't watched the videos, go back. It's the two most recent before this. One focuses on the current contracts on the team, what they should do with those players, and the second one focuses on all of our free agents that are pending right now, and whether they should come back to the team or not. So, I will go ahead and recap that for you as quickly as I can so we can get through everything else too. But we'll go ahead and we'll start with the contracts that we changed on this team. So first of all, Blake Hance is our Calvin Ridley on here. He is representing him because we cannot get Calvin Ridley to count because technically right now he's not on the 51-man roster that goes towards the salary cap. So Blake Hance is our representation of that. We gave him the same contract, so that's why he's on here. Now, we restructured a few players, and we wanted to restructure guys that we were confident we were keeping the whole time because we don't want to pay dead cap down the road. So we did that with Christian Kirk, Foyesade Oluokun, and Darius Williams. Because to me, I envision all of those starters staying as starters until the end of their contracts at least. And I could see for all of them a path where they stick around longer. I think they proved that this last year in the way they played. So those are three of the restructures. We also released a few players. So Shaquille Griffin was a player we released. We also released Roy Robertson Harris. And then K'Lavon Chaisson is either going to be a trade or it's going to be a release and he has to be claimed. Now, if K'Lavon Chaisson hits the market and no one wants him, no one claims him, then there's really no point in the move because we're already going to have to pay his full contract. But you don't know that until he hits the market, right? So I imagine he would get claimed. Just being a former first rounder, someone's going to take a chance on it. So you can save some money there, and I think it makes sense for the team. So that's one of our moves here. Now, as far as other moves, we really did two other things as far as who was already on the roster. Josh Allen, we went ahead and re-signed him to a long-term deal. Reasoning why, and this is one that I think is fair for a lot of people to disagree on because there's a lot of conflicting opinions about him as a player right now. The reason why I did it is because I believe he's going to be a really good pass rusher long-term. I think he has the ability. I think he's going to prove it this year. I have faith in him. And if the Jaguars feel the same way and you're confident enough, I think this is the best time that you could sign a long-term deal. Because if you do it, you push money down the road again. You get him for cheaper. Because say he goes and proves himself this year and you don't have that long-term contract, the price is going up a lot. It's not going to be near as cheap as it could be right now. So I would take that risk. And we also save quite a bit of money making a move like that. So I think that's a good decision. And then Jamal Agnew was an obvious one. He had a big impact in the playoffs as a returner. Obviously the fumble happened. That's just, it's unfortunate, but it's a one-time thing. It's not like he's a huge fumble machine or an issue in that regard. And so with him having 1 year left, he's an obvious candidate after making a Pro Bowl to extend, to bring back long-term, and to push money down the road with again. So we went ahead and did that with Jamal Agnew. So those are all of our moves for the the current players on the roster. And then for pending guys, we've really brought back about every notable player. The only one we didn't was Marvin Jones. And I still think there's a shot this team brings him back. but it really comes down to whether he decides he wants to play for a cheaper contract as a rotational player on a Super Bowl caliber team, or be a starter on a contract where he earns more on a team that's rebuilding or middle of the pack. Because I think he can start in the NFL, but there's no one he's going to beat out for a job here. So that's kind of our moves here. We projected a lot of fair contracts for all these players. The only one I think, well, actually there's probably two on here I think could change a lot. Those being Evan Ingram and probably Arden Key, because the value ranges are kind of crazy on them right now, but I think we went with something reasonable. And so after cutting down the roster, we have 42 players that are currently against the cap, saving room for the 9 players that get taken in the draft. We have $15.3 million in cap space, which is when you factor in what the draft pool is going to cost, which is $9.9 million. We've got about $5.4 million to spend. So there's a bit there. In every free agent you're signing, their impact on the cap is what you're paying them the first year minus the contract of the player you are releasing from the team to make room. So we can actually make a few moves. So we'll go ahead actually and we'll talk about those moves. And I think there's a lot of different ways this team can make sense. I'll start with that. I think they could look to address really all the defensive issues in free agency. I think there's a path to that because for the pass rush, I think if you bring in a veteran, that's a really great move. But at the same time, maybe you want to go to the draft for that. Maybe that's the best route. Or maybe you say, all the guys in-house are good enough to get it done. We're going to stick with that group. For me, I think the best route is to add a veteran. Add someone who's been around a really long time, that's going to be on a cheap deal, that's looking to make a Super Bowl. Because now that we proved that we can make a deep playoff run, we can be there at the end, those kinds of players are going to want to start playing in Jacksonville. So it's time we take advantage of that. And the other spot on the defense is slot corner, and I think you could find one in free agency for a pretty good price. But at the same time, I think you can argue the corner class in the draft is quite frankly fantastic this year. And if you use one of your picks on day 1 or day 2 on a corner, I think you would get someone who could absolutely start in the slot and do it really well. And there's a few names I really like there. So you got options. And on the offensive side of the ball, it's more so just trying to kind of supplement the talent, have backup plans, have guys who can just add a new element to each position. Because, for example, you don't necessarily have to get another running back, but it would be nice to get a running back that's either a fantastic blocker, provides something that ETN doesn't, so more of like a stronger, more powerful player, or get someone who is better at receiving. If I said that twice, I meant run blocking and receiving. So, not sure if I said that twice, but you get the point. Tight end. Maybe you look for someone who can block. I think that's an option. On the offense, I think as far as starters, the only place that I'm looking to upgrade is probably guard. I think every other spot on this offense is locked down as far as who's starting. So I think you could get a new left guard. I think that would be a good route to go. So with all that said, we're going to go ahead, we're going to talk about the free agents that we're going to project this team. You see one here actually, because I didn't delete this before. But we've got 2 guys we're going to bring on. And you could bring on more, but we're going to start with 2. So here's our first guy, Foster Moreau. Before we do his contract, we're going to look at him as a player. And if you play fantasy football, you'll probably know who Foster Moreau is, because he's probably one of your waiver wire additions you made a couple of years back to bail you out, and he did a pretty good job at it. So Foster Moreau, he's the backup tight end for the Las Vegas Raiders, behind Darren Waller. And there's a lot of players in the NFL, if they were playing behind Darren Waller, that would be a backup, quite frankly. So Foster Moreau is a tight end that's, quite frankly, pretty solid. And he's proven he's reliable as a backup. And you'll see the one thing in here that's extremely valuable the Jaguars need to try to improve is getting a better pass blocker at the tight end position. You see the run blocking is kind of, it's not great. But I think it's still a pretty solid upgrade for that position. I think you can get Moreau out on the field on those plays. And you can also rely on him as a catcher, as a receiver. So you get your second guy. You don't got to worry about the tight end position, which, again, is another deep position in the draft. You could absolutely go address it there. But the thing is, you just don't have enough picks at the start to hit all of these positions the way you want to. So we've got to resolve some of them in free agency. So Foster Moreau is the first guy we're going to get. And the deal we're going to sign with him is for $8.5 million over 2 years with a $3.5 million signing bonus. So we'll go ahead and we'll structure that, see what the cap hit is, see what the change is. So here's our signing bonus. Keep the minimum base salary the first year. First year is also fully guaranteed. In the second year, the bonus he got paid is what's guaranteed. Yeah, I think this is another player you could see some variance on what the contract looks like because it depends on how he's really projected. Like, is this a guy that's, oh, he's just a backup? Or is this a player that some teams might think he could start on their roster? I think you could see that. But you see here, if you do the math on these numbers, these will add up to $8.5 million. We'll transact that. And then we got to cut a player to make room. So we'll shoot for, I think in this situation, Bryce Newt Connor, honestly. And he could be still on the 53-man squad, but this is guys who are counting against your 51. So we'll do Snoop Connor on that. And our second free agent you've heard me talk about before, and you just saw over here earlier, with Justin Houston. So the big thing with Justin Houston, I'll look at him on PFF as well for you. Justin Houston is your veteran 3-4 outside linebacker. You bring him into this team, you get a clear leader on the defense in the pass rushing unit. You get someone who can play where Walker's been and allow Walker to move more to the defensive line to play where Roy Robertson Harris is vacating his role. So you free up your number 1 overall pick to play more in the role that, quite frankly, fits him better. And you get Justin Houston, who is going to be cheap, hunting for a Super Bowl, and super effective when he's on the field. You get him in the building. And what I mean by super effective is you look at the sacks that he had. So I think, look on here and verify this. Yeah, because I don't, he got 9.5 sacks this last year. You're looking at a lot of sack production. Very good player still at his age. And what's even crazier about him is you look at the amount of time he's been on the field. Sure, we don't need that. Although you can see outside linebacker is where he's played the vast majority of his snaps. But this last year, 423 snaps on the field. Go back a few years, he's playing double that. So he's more of a rotational player at this point, but even as a rotational player, he's super effective. He's just a really great player right now. And so think with the way he's played, his age at, I believe it was 33 years old, I was going to sign him to $9 million a year. We're going to do this a little different. We're going to go with $10 million. So I think he's worth that. I think you can definitely justify that. So we'll give him $4 million in signing bonus. That's our number here. Hopefully I get this right. Yep, okay. So if we set the numbers to this, fully guarantee his first year. That's your hit against the cap. You got more money in the last year, and you have $2 million guaranteed because you've already paid him that money. You're on the books for it. It's basically dead cap regardless of what you do. So you get Justin Houston on this team at an affordable cost, and you have the option to move on if it doesn't work out. But quite frankly, I absolutely think it would work out. You look at his stats every year. You see one year where he was a little down in production, but then this year, being on the field half the time that his teammates are, he's almost hitting 10 sacks. He's getting an interception. And, I mean, if you look back farther, he's a fantastic player. 22 sacks in a season. I think that was technically 23 if you count the postseason. He was a monster for Kansas City. I think he's a very logical addition to this team when you consider what he's being paid, what you're lacking, and what he can do on the field, where he plays just really everything about it. So, I mean, out of these two additions, which one has the bigger impact? It's absolutely got to be Justin Houston out of the two. And we make that move, you see the cap space about $10 million, and we will cut a player, so we will cut like Chris Claybrooks, because we're going to be getting another corner on this roster. That's going to be a must-need for this team. Other names, just to throw them out there, as far as guys you could look at in free agency, and we've talked about some of these before, and I'm sure we'll probably do another video or two before free agency hits about more guys the team could go after. You got two guys at cornerback that make a lot of sense. Byron Murphy from Arizona, a player who can play inside, outside, is just a solid cornerback. Someone you can rely on who's young and has performed pretty well. You're probably looking at $8 to $9 million with him. But the other option at that position that I like a lot is Sean Murphy-Bunting. Comes from Tampa Bay. He, I believe, wasn't able to start in his role that he had played before because of Jamel Dean having a breakout year. Ended up losing his job to him. So not an ideal season, obviously. But as a slot corner, he's really good at that position. And he can play outside if needed. He has a little bit better size than Byron Murphy, but the career just, hasn't gone as great. Not by a ton, but not as good. And so for him, it's a lot cheaper. Probably looking at $5 to $6 million each year. That's quite a bit down. So if you're looking to fix cornerback in free agency, those moves make sense. Other guys I think they could target, think at receiver, if you're looking to add there, which I like some names in this free agent class there, but I also think it's best for this team to get rookies in here. We've already got so many players who are veterans who are going to be on their second contracts at that position, as in literally 100% of them, that we need to bring in young guys that can develop and eventually be your starters. So that's a move I would rather make, but if you're looking at free agency, Mecole Hardman and Paris Campbell are probably the two biggest names that stick out to me. And then even at running back, you could go after Samaje Perine or Jerick McKinnon, where those guys add a fantastic number 2 back that can block and at the same time can receive. So the two things you haven't had a ton of from ETN. But I also believe with ETN that especially as a receiver, I think they can absolutely use him more. I don't think he's limited as far as what he can do there. It's just the matter of getting him out as a receiver more often. I mean, this is a player that they were lining up in the slot in his rookie minicamp. Like, they obviously believed he could do that. And that was Urban Meyer that set him up in that position, but we also saw Doug Peterson do some of that same stuff in the offseason. So I think you could argue that Travis Etienne can be used in that role still. So that's what I would do in free agency. I think there's some different ways you can go about it, but I think this would be a solid way of looking at it. You get two guys who could have an impact on this roster, and you go into the draft without a ton of needs, really. You're kind of free to do what you want. The one thing I think you just absolutely have to hit is cornerback, though. You got to get in on the cornerback class. So look at the depth chart before we hop into this mock draft. And we'll try to go through that quick because I don't want to make you guys have to sit through a 90-minute video. So your depth chart at quarterback, you're obviously good. Running back, you've got Hasty as your backup still. You feel good about that position, but it'd be nice to add in another player. At receiver, you need to get a fifth guy. You could say that's Tim Jones, but I think you need to add someone else there in the draft. Tight end, you're really situated well at that spot now. You don't need to worry about it in the draft. If you have a really nice name follow you, then perhaps you go that route. But I don't think they would need to. And on the offensive line, you brought back everyone. You brought back all the notable names. And I think the only place that I would look to upgrade, if I could, is left guard. And that just really depends on how the board looks in the first round. Maybe you could go after like an Andrew Voorhees in the second round if you don't hit that position off the bat. But overall, still a really good offensive line. You have your backup tackle in Walker Little. That's a really good backup tackle to have. Your defensive line, you get Trayvon Walker there in the spot where Roy Robertson Harris was before. And then you've still got DeJuan Smoot back on this team whenever he returns. And at your 3-4 outside linebacker spots, you got Josh Allen still. And you throw in Justin Houston, which is a huge upgrade to the pass rushing unit. On the interior, you've got Oluokun and Lloyd, Chad Muma out on the field as well. Cornerback's the same, and the rest of your secondary is the same. And so, clear needs here. I think on the defensive side of the ball, the one thing you absolutely have to hit is cornerback, like we've said. On the offense, it'd be nice to hit a guard, get someone who can start there. You'd like to get a receiver to develop. You'd like to get a running back, if possible, to throw in the mix. And you could argue it'd be nice to get a defensive tackle, too. Someone on the interior that can push the pocket and also get pressure on the quarterback. Because right now there's been a whole lot of stepping up in the pocket and making throws, and I don't think we want much more of that. So that's how the roster looks before this draft. So let's go ahead. Let's just hop right in this. So we've got 9 selections. We'll be trading this 5th rounder to the Falcons once we get to that selection, because this will not be our pick by the time the draft comes around, because this is what will be part of the trade for Calvin Ridley. And we'll get our 6th rounder back, which is currently the Atlanta Falcons, because Calvin Ridley has not been reinstated. And then we'll also see draft capital tied up from that trade next season. Starts with a 4th. If he does good to a certain extent, it's a 3rd. And if he re-signs to the team after, it's a 2nd. And I believe they said it had to be a long-term contract. So I'm not sure how that plays out exactly. But that's the crux of how that trade works. So we will trade that away. We've got 1 selection in each of the rounds in days 1 and 2. 2 4th round selections could give us capital to move around if needed. We've got a 5th rounder, which will be traded away. We'll have 3 6th rounders and a 7th rounder. So 9 selections overall. So we're going to go ahead and won't skip to the pick. We want to see who's available. Might be a good name here. So, at this point, Brian Branch, Broderick Jones are probably the 2 players who've fallen. See Brian Branch go off the board, Michael Mayer off the board. So here, I think you've got 3 good options. You've got Broderick Jones, who you could argue should be off the board a lot earlier. And he can kick in and play guard. Thing with him, though, I think he's a player who's going to want to play tackle. And you could force him to play guard because you have him under contract for 4 years, and it would be 5 after the 5th year option. So he's definitely a consideration. It's a good name here. Cam Smith, be a really good fit on this defense. He's going to be versatile, be able to play in the slot and on the outside. He could fix your cornerback issue right off the bat. But you've also got Cyrus Torrence here. Torrence would immediately be your answer at left guard. He's going to elevate your offensive line. He can even play swing tackle, he has said. Take that how you want. And long term, if you need to move on from Brandon Scherf, you can move him over to right guard if needed. So you have versatility on whichever guard spot you want to add a player to in the future. As far as other names, if you look at some of these pass rushers, DeJuan Jones is also enticing, but I'm not sure that's the direction they would go. I think with this one, I wanted to go with Cyrus Torrence before this, I really did. But I think we're just going to go after the more valuable position and get the player who has the more upside long term and is already a fantastic player with all the size. We're going to go Broderick Jones. I think for this team at that point, that's a steal. If he falls that far, you take that. And you also, quite frankly, you hurt some of your competitors. Because you look at the Bills, the Bengals, and the Chiefs, they're going to be wanting tackle. They're going to want to hit their offensive line, so you get a really valuable prospect and you take that away from them. Now, of course, Cyrus Torrence is still here. Sucks not to get him, but Broderick Jones is just a better pick. That's just the way I feel about it, and so we'll probably see Torrence go to the Bills, realistically. Yep, there it is. That's a pretty popular one. Now, we'll see if anyone crazy falls. If they don't, yeah, I don't see anyone too crazy at this point. It's got some of the pass rushers actually falling pretty far. You could trade up for one of the pass rushers. However, you still got to hit corner. So you're kind of narrowed in to that. I think if we trade up for a pass rusher, we don't want to give up as much capital. See him go off the board. Isaiah Foskey's still there. I'm not huge on Foskey. He has the size, but yeah, there he goes. I'm not sure if he's going to get it all figured out at the NFL level. I think he can, but it is a little risky. So let's just go ahead and skip to the pick. So here, Luke Musgrave would have been really enticing, especially if you didn't bring in Foster Moreau. He's a player that would make a lot of sense for the Jaguars. I think the comparison I've heard to the NFL is that he's a mix of Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, which, you know, when you have Doug Peterson as your head coach, you might be a little interested in that. You got Emmanuel Forbes here as well. Be a very valuable pick. Keon White could be a good defensive lineman for your team. Mozzie Smith. I like Chris Smith a lot too. Gervon Dexter probably wouldn't go this high, but a lot of tools. I'll tell you what we are going to do though. We're going to go with a different pick, and someone I have not talked about on here. Someone who makes a ton of sense for the Jaguars. Tyreek Stevenson is going to be our selection. So Tyreek Stevenson is a player that you could actually see go in the first round in this draft. It's possible. Could see him go that early. He is a physical guy. He's fantastic at press coverage, at man coverage, things that the Jaguars defense is going to look for. You look at the way Tyson Campbell is. You look at how he was as a prospect coming into the NFL. I think you can draw a lot of comparisons to Tyreek Stevenson. And although Tyreek Stevenson is going to be very scheme specific in the NFL, the Jaguars have the exact scheme to fit him. He has slot experience. He's been really good in the slot in college, and he can play outside if needed. So you get your cornerback here. You get in on the fun. You choose someone who fits your team. Fits your team great. And also, as far as a personality, a very humble player. Having watched one of his interviews from the Senior Bowl, I mean, he's a fun guy to listen to. Someone I think that would be definitely liked in Jacksonville a lot. So with that done, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to skip to the next pick. We're going to see who's available on the board. That kills me right there. That would have been my selection most likely. I would love to get Xavier Hutchinson. I think he would be a really nice selection to the team. But alas, he's not available. Now here, two names pop off the board to me. One of those being Will McDonald. And the other one, well, would be either Tank Dell or Travius Hodges-Tomlinson. Travius, we're going to skip on him because we've hit our cornerback spot. You could go after another cornerback. Maybe you need it, but I think you feel pretty solid at that position. And then, as far as between Will McDonald and Tank Dell, I think for me, as great as it sounds to get this kind of speed at this point in the draft, I think you could try to steal someone later on at the position. And with that size, when you put him on the field, I feel like you're going to have to put him in the slot. And that means you're going to have to take Christian Kirk off the field for him. And we've already got a fast slot player. And that guy is Jamal Agnew. So I think with considering that, the value of picking Tank Dell or Nathaniel Dell on here, I don't think it's worth it. So as much as I don't know if Will McDonald will play at outside linebacker, which is what I'd like to see. Actually, let's look at his draft profile really quick. Got him as a stand-up edge rusher. Okay. He didn't play this a lot in college, for one or another. We'll actually look at him real quick. He's going to be our selection. But if we look at where he's played, like this last season, yeah, it's mainly on the defensive line. I believe this is saying he's standing up. He's on the outside. So he's going to be our guy at this pick. So you get someone to throw in on your pass rush. So far, I'd say this almost every pick didn't turn out the way I expected as far as who was on the board. But it's still really good value at all of these selections. You're getting players that you're really taking advantage of who's falling down the board. There's a lot of players who could fall down this board on draft day. With how many people have stood out in the draft process, you're going to have someone really nice available at these picks. You get that with Broderick Jones in the first round, Tyreek Stevenson, Will McDonald in the third round, late third round. It's just crazy. Now at this point, I think I know where we're going with this pick. I think we're going to go with Dontavian Wicks. Look at his profile real quick. His well, you can see I still need to be reminded about some of these players. I watched him a bit. He seems like a solid player, someone who could work pretty well in the NFL. Yeah, you see the projection spread receiver. MVS isn't a terrible comparison for this point of the draft. I think he's going to be our guy that we develop. So we're going to hit the receiver position. So now we've got a young player we're going to develop there. Would have liked Xavier Hutchinson, but hey, he's not on the board, so what can you do about that? Skip to the next selection. I think I know who we're going to go with here. I think we're going to go with the running back position. We're going to get our guy to throw in. Deuce Vaughn, I really like what he provides. I think he's a really great player, and I think he'll be great in the NFL. But I'm not going to make that selection because I cannot imagine the Jaguars getting him. I just can't. With that size, 5'6", as much as I think that helps him as a running back in some things, I just don't see the Jaguars getting that. And then between Sean Tucker and Roschon Johnson, I think Roschon Johnson offers a little more. I think he offers all those things you're really missing at running back. So I'm going to go with him. He offers a lot better size, you see, as a running back. So Sean Tucker would have been nice, but we're going to go with Roschon Johnson. So we'll run through the rest of this draft kind of quick so we can get to the end of this and kind of evaluate this roster and spend some time on that. This selection, this will be traded away for the Calvin Ridley compensation. Don't know why nothing's popping up. Might not be able to. This would run into a bug. Alright, well, we're going to make a selection here, I guess. So, at this point, what we'll just take a player a little farther down the board. Let's go with, I think Luke Schoonmaker could be a solid addition to this team. Get a tight end that you can bring on and try to develop. It'd be alright at this point. I think he'd also be available in the 6th round, so I don't think that'll impact too much. Alright, at this point, Tyjae Spears would have been cool, but he would also be a 4th running back on this team, so I don't think that's going to be necessary. At this point, with how the board looks, we're going to go with Tyler Lacey. Gonna add a defensive lineman on, add some depth on the interior, someone you can develop. That's really what you're looking for at this point. You see pretty solid size at 6'4", so you can definitely accept that. We're going to take another shot here. We're going to go with Ronnie Hickman first. I'm going to see if certain someone is available for my last selection. I think he is. Find him. Here he is. Alright, so Michael Wilson, this was a guy I was looking for in one of the previous videos. I think I drafted Michael Jefferson instead by accident, or I was going to. Michael Wilson was a player who stood out at the Senior Bowl really well. Has a lot of good attributes. His size is good. He was comped to Devontae Adams, but don't get it wrong. He's not Devontae Adams. He's not that exact same player. You're not just getting the steal of a lifetime in the 7th round. At least you think. And he's had some injury issues, and we know Trent Baalke likes to take his shots with that. So that's where we're going to end off this draft. Gonna get him on this team, and I think you could see him make the roster even with 5 other receivers, because maybe they just consider Jamal Agnew as a returner. I don't think that's a great idea, but I can see them carry 6 receivers if this is your receiving core. and he works out. So that's going to be our draft. Now, what I'm going to do, we're going to insert these players onto the depth chart. We're going to evaluate this team heading into the off-season, or sorry, not the off-season, would be heading into training camp. We're going to see where there might be some holes. Really just kind of break this down and evaluate it. So we'll be right back in a moment. All right, so we are back. We've got this depth chart updated. Got all of our moves in. This would be our 51 men that would make the roster for sure. And you could see that change. Sometimes players step up during training camp and just play better, or during the preseason. Some guys fall off, but you're not really going to see that with a ton of your, really any of your starters, and really even the second stringers. So this is how our roster looks now. So we're going to go through this position by position and just kind of recap what we've done this offseason, the moves we made. So at quarterback, obviously Lawrence is your starter. He's going to be a starter here for hopefully another 2 decades. And Nathan Rourke seems to be the backup they're going with for the future. Maybe they keep CJ Beathard, but I'm expecting Rourke to be the guy, and ultimately you hope it doesn't even matter. At running back, you've still got ETM, but you've got your second guy to play with them. You got Roschon Johnson. You brought back Hasty. And Roschon Johnson will open up your receiving game from the backfield. He's going to help you with pass blocking. You can get him involved as a second running back pretty well on this team, I would say. So running back, you're feeling great. And at receiver, you've got Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, the guys you already know are going to be on this team. Jamal Agnew's back. And we've also added a couple young guys to the position. You add Dontavian Wicks, who could be a solid player to develop, who's got all the physical tools, and this team just needs to work on him. And then you've got Michael Wilson, who showed off really well at the Senior Bowl, looked like a great player, and like he could actually translate to the NFL really well. It's just a question of, is he going to be injured all the time, or is this just kind of going to be something that people forget about a couple years from now? But could be a steal late in the draft. So I think out of these 2 guys, you got someone that you hope you can develop into a starter long term. You hope. But you've got 3 on the roster already. So if you don't, you don't. You just hope you can. At tight end, we've got 2 of our guys back, Evan Ingram and Luke Farrell. We also add on Foster Moreau from free agency to upgrade your blocking on the team. And we got Luke Schoonmaker late in the draft. So we get another guy to throw in at that position to help out. Really just trying to add that depth back to the tight end position and give it a good backup to where, say Evan Ingram goes down, we still got Moreau they can put out on the field, and I think they can get him involved. So really good insurance policy. Now on the offensive line, we kept Jawan Taylor. Managed to get him back on a deal. Didn't trade any pieces, even though we could have. We could have looked to move on from Cam Robinson, but I'm trying to be more realistic with this, so we kept him around. And in the draft, it was likely going to be Osiris Torrance at the first selection. That's the route that I was expecting to go, but Broderick Jones falls down the board. You see this sometimes with really good players, and he falls into Jacksonville's lap, and he has to be the selection. He can play guard. You know he can do that. You know that he's got the long-term upside to be a really good tackle on the team. Could be the left tackle of the future, but maybe Walker Little's that. And that's a good problem to have. That's a really good problem for a team. You got a ton of really good players that could start at important positions. So Broderick Jones, nice addition for this team. Nice guy to get in. And you look at your offensive line, and you got to feel great about the unit you're putting out. You got to feel great about the depth you have. You're not going to be worried about that part of the offense. So evaluating the entire offense, I don't think you really got any flaws. I mean, you could have technically better starters, but I mean, you've got insurance policies at these positions, except quarterback, obviously. Not many teams are going to have a backup that can go win a Super Bowl, but you got the coach who can do it, right? So you like your offense. You feel good about that heading into the season. You think they should be a lot better than what they were last year. You set up all these players to succeed, and you set up guys behind them that can step in a pinch if needed. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, honestly, this was where I didn't expect to have as many additions, but you add on some pretty valuable players. You look at the defensive line, you get Trayvon Walker moved to defensive end. You get Will McDonald in the draft. Now, you can have him here. Actually, miswrote this a little bit. So you'll have him as your backup at left end, but you can also use him as a backup out here. So we'll actually just update this really quick. So it'll look like this. So Will McDonald, that's an extra pass rusher on your team. You can move him around to different spots. Someone who could develop into a really good player at the next level. So you've got a slew of pass rushers on this team. You even look at the linebacker positions. You got your outside linebackers. You had Justin Houston there, a sack monster throughout his NFL career, still playing at a high level. You give him a nice contract for his age. You give him the opportunity to go compete for a Super Bowl, and you're looking good in your front seven. I mean, you want to name off the pass rushers on this team. You got Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker, Justin Houston, Arden Key, DeJuan Smoot, and Will McDonald. 6 guys that you could look at to have an impact. So you got to hope that works, right? You got to hope that's better than what it was last year. And in the secondary, you've got 2 additions at that spot. You've got Tyreek Stevenson coming in immediately, being your slot corner. And then he has the ability to play outside if needed, so you have an insurance policy out there. However, I think this is where the one weakness is with this team, the one clear weakness, other than just having a ton of injuries at one position. If you have a cornerback go down, Trey Herndon has to start somewhere. That's what you're likely looking at. So that's not ideal, but I also think if you have a cornerback go down, you can always make a trade. You can always try to sign someone to help. I think this team could be in that kind of position. So maybe you look to bring in another guy, and we could have looked to bring in a Sean Murphy Bunting. And I think we could have. It would have required restructuring Zay Jones. So that's a route they could have gone. So maybe that's the one weakness on this team. Injury concerns at cornerback if these guys go down. And at safety, you bring back your guys and you get another one to develop in Ronnie Hickman. So you look at this roster, I think you feel great about this team heading in the future. You may not agree on necessarily all the prospects. Everyone's got their my guys, and some of these guys would fit the bill for me. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to look at the salary cap situation a little bit. So this season, when you factor in the guys you drafted, you've got probably just over $1 million that you're carrying over to the next season. And when you factor in what the rookie contracts are going to be worth that next season, you're probably looking at having about $30 million over the cap. So, same situation. Now, here's where you fix that. You have, I would say, 3 players for sure that have big cap implications on their contracts. Actually, more than that. You have 2 that are really big. Cam Robinson and Brandon Scherf. And I think each of those players could be replaced. I think you can do that. You've got 4 tackles on your team. You have 1 playing guard and you have 1 being the swing tackle. You can move on from Cam Robinson and still have a really nice backup. Because if you move on from Cam, you just start Walker Little, you move Broderick Jones outside, if one of your players goes down. So you can move on from Cam. Now, Brandon Scherf, maybe you decide to bring back Ben Barch as a starter. I prefer that because you replace him essentially as a starter with Broderick Jones, but hey, maybe you just gotta draft a guard, or you gotta find one in free agency. Just those two moves, you're back under the cap. And you gotta save up money for your draft class. But full Lorenzo Fatukasi could save you $8 million. And as a player, he really hasn't been as impactful as you expected. Maybe you move on from that. Rayshawn Jenkins. I think that's possible. You could see him have a season where he's just not as impactful as last year and he's not able to live up to it. Not that he's awful, but I think that's possible. So, point is, you have options. You have a way to get back under the cap. And so, as scary as this might look, it's very similar to this whole situation we've talked about for this year. There are ways to manage this and still be able to put together a much better team. From a team that went to the divisional round of the playoffs and came into Arrowhead and put up a fight, you can get better. You can get a lot better. And so, as I said before, I hope this kind of shows you guys that this offseason is still going to be fun. They're still going to be able to make moves. They're still going to be able to make this roster better. It's just a matter of having the creativity to make it happen. And the best part of it is that the Jaguars front office will probably have a lot more creativity than myself or any of the Arrow people you watch. And I think they proved it last season. I think they proved it with some of the trades they made, specifically just the Calvin Ridley trade, the creativity behind that. And the way they structure these contracts, I think they know what they're doing. I do believe in their ability to put together an NFL team. So, give you one last look at the depth chart here. I think you'd feel really good heading into next year. I think this team would have a shot to go take on Kansas City and take on really anyone else who stood in their way. I think it would be Super Bowl caliber, whether it won one or not. So, with that said, I appreciate you watching this video and any of the others if you watch those. Let me know if you have any suggestions for content. Thankful for y'all watching. Thankful for y'all supporting this. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And go Jags.